I know Lake Superior better than Lake Michigan. And I guess what I know for sure is that lake is a lot colder than what I just walked through. Water felt great. What a great way to start the morning.
That's right, I'm inside the beast, the belly of the beast. All of this is the indoor greenhouse space, temperature controlled spaces back here. There's a room back there that can be kept at 35 to 40 degrees for all the trees that have to go into that temperate zone, into that dormancy. And so we are here to meet Chris Baker, and I'm gonna let the video speak for itself. This is awesome, y'all.
So we have two outdoor grow outs. These are our indoor spaces.
Okay.
So these are our two overwintering, or two of our three overwintering spaces. This is the minimum heat, so we keep that about 34, 35.
Okay.
And that's where the majority of the trees go. And then over here, we keep this a little warmer. It's not a true Mediterranean, but we'll keep black pines, red pines, camellias, olives, azaleas, that sort of stuff in here, so it's a little bit warmer.
Oh, sure.
So we have about 300, and then we have, I would say, probably 120 or more trees that I would consider display quality. So we rotate the trees through the courtyards frequently. Yeah. And the courtyards, as you saw, are a really nice display space, but they're very exposed. So the trees get rotated frequently because of that. So we give them breaks from the sun and the full exposure, and that's why we've got a bunch of our trees off display now, preparing for the August show.
What are you looking for at this particular place with these 300 trees to put them out there as a quality tree?
Oh, I just think a certain level of refinement and interest. You know, what we're trying to, over the last couple of years, I've really been searching for a rebrand, if you will, or creating more of an identity of the collection. When I started, you know, the collection was pretty traditional bonsai. And I feel like we've expanded on that. We've really kind of connected with American potters, American woodworkers and sand makers, and trying to use more native species and trying to go with more of kind of a natural looking style versus a more traditional bonsai style. And so as a public collection, we really tried to span, I think, a number of styles. So we'll always have traditional bonsai.
For sure.
But we've included some penjing. We've created penjing, and we are adding more of those. And then also, my real passion is with a more natural style of tree and trying to capitalize on a native, not only regional species, but North American species.
Do you think that's a West thing in general, that we're trying to be more naturalized than other bonsai collections? Is that just you personally, or?
No, I don't. I'm certainly not the only one doing that, right? I mean, I think many people are doing that approach nowadays.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I don't know when that went back to, but certainly long before I was interested in it. And I think some of it had to do with, you know, the collecting of native species. And so when you start collecting trees from nature versus having trees that are cultivated from seed or cutting, where you are doing everything on the tree, you know, when you collect a native pine or do something like that, there, you know, you don't have the freedom to pick and choose from every single branch and make it this formal looking thing. The trees are growing wild, and nature is sculpting them and changing them. And so, you know, I'm just taking the cues from those trees and just kind of leaning into what's already going on. But there's a lot of collections. You know, I've been to the Denver collection a number of times, and Larry Jackal was a big influence when I first started working with Arthur Durer at the North Carolina Arboretum, and that's like really their theme of their collection is native Southern Appalachian species, and the way that Arthur styles them in this natural style, breaking those old habits of creating pads in a certain way and having the structure be a certain way. So, and again, trying to create trees that look to me more like trees I see. And I can appreciate as a public collection, it's a great opportunity to reach people who don't have an interest in bonsai. When you look at professionals and other types of bonsai clubs and stuff, you have people who are already there for bonsai. Yeah. And when you have a public garden, many people come here that have never seen bonsai in person, or don't necessarily come here for the bonsai, but then they're exposed to it. Yeah. And so it's a great opportunity to show people all of the kind of disciplines that you might find in this art form that we happen to call bonsai, right? And so so that's where I think that we are right now. And so I although my personal taste is, becoming more prevalent, I feel like it's kind of the responsibility to have a little bit more of a wide range of things just to show people.
Sure. Diversity.
Diversity is good.
On my road trip here, on my first leg, I listened to a podcast, the Asymmetry podcast. Ryan talked about, if you have a wide species of trees, you collect them in nature, and you want them to look more naturalistic, there's that concern that you as a bonsai artist, are you not doing enough bonsifying of that tree, and you're getting something that's already looking, it's already been weathered, it's already been this. Is it harder to care for a tree and harder to make it look natural if it already comes from nature? I don't know if the question's being clear here or not, but you still have to do really quality bonsai techniques, do you not, to have any of these varieties show a good tree?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I think, if you start with, our limber pine that you saw in the courtyards, right? So estimated 600 to 1,000 years old, collected in Estes Park around 1980 by Harold Sasaki, was purchased by Gerald Weiner, and then eventually got donated here to the collection. Sure. That tree looked vastly different 10 years ago when I started. I could show you some cool pictures of it. Then we had Walter Paul come in a bunch of years ago. Walter styled it with me in a public forum, and Jennifer Price. That was in Bonsai Focus magazine. And then even from that was like, we really tightened it up. And then now you see it and it's really like stretched out, and there's way more tension, and there's way more, I feel like, a nod towards the natural looking trees that you would find up at that elevation. Sure. And so, so I think
you didn't collect it, put it in a pot, and it was done by any stretch.
Correct. And it's, like I said, even in my tenure, it's evolved. And before that, it would have evolved a great deal too. So I just think when you get a tree from nature, Mother Nature, yes, has done a lot of the work for you. And she's way better at much of it than I am, but to be fair, she's had a longer period of time to do it, right? So, 600 to 1,000 years, she's had a lot of time to develop that tree. I've only had 10. Right. So, but we're not a big proponent of collecting, right? We're not, like, we have collected material. Occasionally we will acquire a collected material from credible sources and people who are doing it ethically and legally. And so we're not promoting, people going out and taking trees from areas they're not supposed to, or any of that stuff. For sure. And with a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to do now is connecting bonsai to areas that are imperiled, or areas that are being affected by climate change, human intervention, invasive pests and diseases. What I would really like to do is to use these plants that we do have that have been collected, not with the purposes of going out and taking them themselves, but to bring attention to those environments. I feel like, there's a place for collected material, and given the fact of not only how long we've been doing bonsai in this country, but like how long we've even been a country, right? Compared to other places like Japan and in Asia, we don't have 300-year-old bonsai that are grown from seed. You know what I mean? So the way that people get age and character is by getting collected material. I like working with collected material. I like the challenges that collected material brings, because again, it's not like a nursery stock or like a pre-bonsai where you have a ton of choices. You're left to work with what you've got. And I love that challenge. And I think that does lend itself to having more asymmetry, having more tension, and being more natural, because that's just the way it grows. The plant's natural growth habit has been established, and so you can work with that, versus a plant that you could take and manipulate because it was a hedge or because you got from a nursery. Yeah. And so I love that challenge, and I love the character and age that comes with that material. But we're certainly not advocates of people going out and stripping the land of ancient trees. Absolutely. I think that our goal moving forward, and a big part of the branding and the identity of this collection that I want it to be is to advocate for those areas and to bring light to those areas and to get people to be interested in saving those areas.
Sure.
And then, using bonsai as an ambassador for those areas, for bogs and for high mountain elevation places that are being impacted by climate change and that sort of stuff. So to me, that's a big passion project, and that's what's been going on for a while. And it's just taking time to get those species and to get the branding and going. In that Crable Gallery right now, as part of our Lost and Found theme for the garden, we have a big bog display.
Yeah.
And so for the show this year in August, where I'm actually putting larch and cedars into the existing bog display, and we're going to be using that as a big part of like, here are these trees, here's where they come from.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking to do some stuff. I was on the Mirai podcast, and Ryan and I were talking. Of course, he's been doing a lot of that for a while as well. And so we were like vibing about trying to do something together and doing a Mirai in the wild with the Chicago Botanical Garden and Mirai. And so I'm super excited about that, of course. And so I'm just trying to figure out logistics and plant material. But we have lots of native stuff here that we're trying to use, and we're trying to create something that's regionally specific to us. Either something that's kind of coastal through Michigan or the northern or Wisconsin area, or we were talking about a bog or doing something. So so to me, that would be a huge exposure for us and really kind of set us up for, having that be a big part of what we do. So again, I think just because we're a public garden and because this collection is bigger than what I want it to be, there's always going to be other aspects. But if we can focus on American potters, American species, doing a more natural style, that's really where my heart lies as far as creating bonsai goes. Yeah. That's the stuff that I'm most excited about. So
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
And working with other collections, right? So we've got several trees here, 2 trees here that we got on permanent loan from the National Collection. This Portulacaria right here, which was originally created by Jim Smith from Florida. This was an exchange I did with Aaron Packard from the Pacific Bonsai Museum. He took an Alberta spruce forest that we had, and he gave us this. I just think, there with the climate and the rain and stuff, it was not thriving as well here. It certainly gets humid, but it's, we have a lot more, I think, heat and sun, and it's done really well here for us. I absolutely love it. When I first got into bonsai, I was in Florida, and one of the first conventions I ever went to was Bonsai Bridges, and Jim Smith was one of the guest artists there, among many others. And so it was so cool to get not only a Jim Smith tree, but a tree from the Pacific Bonsai Museum, which to me is just one of the best public collections in the country.
I push these trees on beginners all the time. A great tree for me, I think, for them to start on. And who says it's not a beautiful bonsai?
Yeah.
That is
that one,
fantastic.
I think there's a point in everyone's development where when you get a tree, you're like, okay, I want to use my whole bag of tricks, right? I want to do everything I can to this tree to manipulate it and make it mine. And at some point, you come to the realization that that's not the way to go, right? And you're not supposed to do that. And I love leaning on the tree and allowing the tree to kind of like dictate and using the tree's natural growth habit and using the architecture that's already there and building off of that. To me, that's a really fun part of the process. This is a recent acquisition that we just got. Picked it up at the Meyer Sculpture Garden for their spring show, their World Bonsai Day show. It was donated by a man named Bruce Baker. Unfortunately, Bruce had passed away. I met him at the national show last year in September, and we talked through the weekend, and he offered to donate it, and then I got an email from his wife and said that he had passed away, but they still wanted to donate the tree. So
I did see, besides the linden out there, the 600 to 1,000-year-old tree, I also saw the Hinoki cypress.
That was here when I started, and that was donated by a man named Peter Voyevich, and it's a very cool. When I started, I'll show you pictures of some of these trees when I started versus now. But yeah, that tree, even a tree like that's very refined at the time, has evolved so much. And the way that we've just decided to prune it and work it and breaking up the pads. And when I first started, the pads were thicker and longer, and we've really broken up the pads and created more individual pads that I think allow for the trunk to be more in the forefront of the design.
I noticed the trunk big time.
And it takes it more from like something, obviously the more foliage mass you have, the more you start shrinking everything. And so that tree evolved quite a bit just by subtraction, right? Negative space, creating that negative space that then, to me, one of the big differences between a young and an old tree is negative space. Death and disease and branches and that sort of thing. And a young tree is full and bushy, and it covers up. And then as trees mature, things start opening up and you start to see more detail and you start to see more branching, and the trunk becomes more and more prominent. And I think that was a big thing for me, because the power and the size of that trunk to me was one of the main features. When you're looking for that feature, every tree, right? Sometimes it's deadwood, sometimes it's foliage, sometimes it's branching, sometimes it's exfoliating bark, whatever it is. And for me, that tree, it was just the sheer power as a formal upright, where you could see a lot of formal uprights that are boring, but I feel like that tree has dynamic features to it, and there's depth, and so that tree was much about addition by subtraction and eliminating things that were blocking what I thought were the cool features of the tree. This is art, right? So when I do something, it's always done, of course, with what I think is in the best interest of the tree. And, I can only do things that are authentic to me. And we were just having this discussion with Angelica, and it's like, if you style a tree to please people, then it will never be anything, because every time you get someone's feedback, you're going to be changing things. You have to stick to what you want to do, and you have to see it through and develop it in that way. And it's art, so people, you could show a bonsai to 10 people and get 12 different opinions, So what I try to do is do things that are authentic, not only to me, but to what I want the collection to be. And that's really the only way that I can approach it. And so, sometimes we make changes, and sometimes people like it, sometimes people don't. But I hope that people just understand that it's always done with the intention of the tree's best interest, the tree's health, and what we're doing. So the most refined trees, change and evolve over time, for many reasons. Could be a million reasons, So trees don't stay static. And that's part of the fun, right? You know, like this thing, this is a great tree. This was donated by Mike and Lunetta Knowlton, and they were from Florida. This tree was displayed at the U.S. National Show and won Best Tropical Bonsai. And later that year, through a connection from Rodney Clemens, he actually, they were looking to donate it. And Rodney said, well, you should check out the Chicago Botanical Garden. And we reached out, somehow we connected. And it was an amazing tree. And obviously in this cool slab, and it's stunning. Bark exfoliates, it's such a cool species. And so this tree got repotted this year and defoliated.
Wow.
And so it hasn't been on display yet, but we are saving it for the August show. So it was in the sun side, and we just recently moved it over here to give it a little shade. It was a little pale, so it's already greening up.
Nice.
And so one of the ways, we have a lot of sun exposure here, not only in our sun side, but the courtyards. And so trees will really get lighter in color. And part of that is just they don't need as much chlorophyll because they're getting pounded by the sun. So one of the things that I will do here is, as kind of like a troubleshooter, is if a tree's looking a little pale and in the courtyards or in the sun side, I will bring it over here in the shade side. And if it starts greening up, then I know that it's not a deficiency of nutrients or some sort of pest issue going on. We have a great plant healthcare team here, so they support me in treating all the trees and identifying things that I might not be identifying properly. And so we work together hand in hand with that. So it's a great collaboration.
That's a great tip, though.
Like literally days after moving this in, it started to green up, and you can see the center lines are greening. And so it has made a remarkable difference just moving it into the shade. So same thing with that bald cypress. It was on display for the entirety of the year so far, and you can see it's getting a little bit light. And so moving it in here, and it was just moved in last week, and I can already see the top is starting to green up. So we have a lot of sun here. The courtyards have a lot of sun, And even our west side grow out, which we'll see in a minute, has a lot of sun. This is a tree here. This is donated by Mr. Susumu Nakamura, who's a Japanese bonsai professional who used to come here and actually work on trees. And so in 2000, Mr. Nakamura donated just like 19 trees to the collection. And this Japanese beech is one of them, which is absolutely stunning.
Stunning.
And so the base of that is absolutely amazing. So when I talk to people, I always tell them, like, we have two different kinds of age here. We have the true age of trees from cultivation, and that's our Japanese trees from Mr. Nakamura. So they, 100 plus, 150 years old, but they were cultivated for the purposes of creating bonsai. And they've been in a container the longest. And then we have our collected material. So again, the limber pine might be very old, but it was only collected in 1980. And so I try to make that distinction for people. So this tree is younger, but it's been in cultivation for so much longer.
Absolutely.
And so there's that difference. We've got many other Robert Wallaces down here. Let me show you this Robert Wallace pot. I got this pot last year at the North Carolina Arboretum. They had their Bonsai as Fine Art. And so I had met Robert there. He's been around for a long time, but I had finally just met him and saw this pot. I had been looking for a pot for this tree forever, and I saw it and I just was like, oh man. And so anyway, I love his work. It's a great pot. We have Sarah Rayners, we have Ron Langs, we have Waldo Street, we've got Robert Wallace, and Allison Grigsby. This is a Don Gould pot, and Don's have the some of Don's have that trademark Keystone logo, which is down there on that pot right there. And so Don unfortunately passed away many years ago, but his pots, I really am very fond of his pots. This one, this one right here. Yeah. So I'm really fond of his pots. Very subtle glazes, but really beautiful work. And then again, that's that Pennsylvania Keystone. He was involved with like Jim Doyle and someone else for years. He used to vend here, I found out. Don Gould did. And so there was a bunch of his pots in the collection and I couldn't figure out why. And then I figured out that he used to vend here, so they were getting his pots. We also have lots of local potters. This is from Karen Schumann, a former volunteer, and she's also a potter, so we've got some stuff from her. Jay Stromer, I think is his name. He's another guy from Chicagoland, and we have some of his containers. So this is our sun side. Gets sun from probably 8:30 or so until 8:30 or 9. Blazing hot sun. And I've added a lot of tropical trees since I got here. I actually started doing bonsai when I lived in Gainesville, Florida. So shout out to the Gators. And I lived there for several years, and that's where I really actually got involved with. I joined a club and got involved. I was in the Bonsai Bridges show that was in Gainesville, and that really changed the trajectory of my bonsai journey. And so we do have a lot of tropical trees because they do well in the courtyards. This is a Rocky Mountain juniper, and this one is planted in a brake drum from a truck. And so several years ago, I had the brake drums replaced on a car of mine, and I thought it was really cool, a much smaller one. And I put a tree in it and I loved it. And then 2 years ago, I was actually putting a personal tree into the Mamba show up in Wisconsin, and this juniper I had, and I thought a brake drum would be cool for it. So I reached out to this mechanic by my house, and I just was like, hey, do you have brake drums? And he's like, yeah, I have a couple now. So I came down, super heavy. It's so inconvenient and impractical because I swear it must weigh 60 pounds. But long story short is I put my tree into that brake drum and displayed it at the Mamba show and absolutely loved it. So I had to take both. That was his thing. He's like, if you take one, you gotta take both. So I thought the Rocky Mountain juniper would look cool in it. And this tree is obviously still in development. At one point was worked on by Morrow, and I got it. I think we bought it from Jim Doyle. A donor had put some money up to purchase a tree, so I got it from Jim one year. But we put it in this brake drum. I love the architecture of it. I love when it goes on display, it'll get polished up and cleaned up, and I won't leave it this rustic. But I love this architecture in there, and I would love to get one that's ceramic that looks like that because it would be a lot easier to handle. Yeah.
the sedum on the bottom or
Yeah.
whatever that is growing,
Yeah.
right? I saw that on one of the displays over there too, in the courtyard in there. Doesn't have to just be moss. Are we thinking outside the box here too? Tell me more about that.
Well, it kind of started from a practicality standpoint because moss does not live in the courtyards.
Yeah.
It's so hot and it's so exposed
Yeah.
that, you know, I love slab plantings and rock plantings and like landscapes and that sort of stuff. And of course, when you're using muck and you're not using a container, you need something to keep the muck in place.
Yeah.
So moss didn't live. So I started trying these little ground covery sedum type things, which are somewhat appropriate for pines, right? They're kind of arid, like the ponderosa pine you saw in the courtyards in the Jan Kulik container. That one has, you know, some hens and chicks and some stuff that, you know, we're trying to just kind of convey this idea of an environment. But there's also a practical point of it.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, you have to work with what you got.
Right.
And in the courtyard with that much heat, you're not going to keep moss.
We're working on shade, and so we're hoping, you know, and then hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll have some shade up there, and then that'll allow us to do it. You know, so that's kind of where it came from.
Bald cypress here I'm looking
This
at?
is a big bald cypress.
Oh,
this
my word.
was a, same as the other cypress over there. This was collected originally by Gary Marshall and wound up being donated by Gary's wife after he had passed. I went down to Atlanta and picked those up.
Beautiful.
A number of years ago. This one here, this is a baobab, so a South African species that was grown by a man named Hank Miller from seed. He used to go there and he would collect seed and do stuff in South Africa. So this was donated last September. Picked it up at the national show. Hank was a vendor here. And so we had just started building a relationship, and then eventually he decided to donate this. So very cool, unique species. And there's we've got some jack pines, which are natives.
Tell me about a jack pine in bonsai. Challenges?
A little bit.
A lot of jacks in northern Minnesota.
Yeah, and they do well. People like them.
I just don't know much about them yet,
Yeah.
and I don't know if people are having luck and not even trying.
That one's a jack pine too, that literati
the
there.
big literati? Okay.
Yeah. So I have found that I try to keep the work minimal and modest.
Okay.
I don't, if you get too aggressive with them, especially with the wiring, they seem to, it seems to disrupt the vascular system and that area will get weak.
Okay.
I definitely don't do a lot of pruning and wiring within the same year of repotting.
Yeah.
I feel like that's not
one of those trees where one job a year.
Yeah, pretty much. So a little bit slow, but I like them.
Yeah.
I like the foliage is pretty tight. It's very coarse. But it has a pretty tight foliage, and I like that it's native. And so we just been playing with it. This one you can see is a little leggy. When I first started here, this one the subordinate tree over there was in decline, and eventually it did succumb to whatever was causing it problems.
Sure.
But this one is thriving, and so
Yeah.
now we'll just lean into that and use the other
bark
one.
is phenomenal.
Yeah,
So
it's got
flaky
good bark.
and lovely.
It's
Yeah.
cool. It's cool. This is a big eastern white pine.
Oh boy.
This one was collected by Jim Doyle many, many years ago. This one's in a Jan Kulik container as well. And this one has been developed. This one you can see is a little more loose, right? So
Sure.
it lends itself to that kind
airy
of,
and open.
Yeah. And I've been playing with this one since I got here. It had a ton more foliage when I started. Obviously, it's leaning towards what I think we would refer to as a literati, but it was more like a huge informal upright at some point because it was so dense.
Yeah.
And through the years, I've just keep reducing and reducing. Actually, I pinch the candles on this, and it really helps. I don't pinch them on a year when I repot. So last year we repotted it, so I didn't pinch last year, but this year I went in and pinched the candles, and they do respond well to that.
Sure.
And I just like that it's funky, and there's branches turning up, and things
Absolutely.
are doing like all kinds of crazy stuff.
And I love some of the wispiness of a white pine.
Yeah.
I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think when you see them in nature, the needles are huge, but this one, we've had some success reducing the size. And then over here, we've got some in-ground stuff. Most of these are from the ground. So these big boxwoods were from an area that got torn up. The redwoods over there are from the model railroad garden. The 4 big ones at least, and the smaller ones I got. So I work with the model railroad with some of their pruning and work, and so these trees were part of some of the stuff I did with them. So they're somewhat developed.
Yeah.
They are massive, of course, not a ton of taper. So at some point there may need to be a chop and grow. They just got in the ground last fall. So I'm not doing anything with them right now.
Right.
We just got these raised beds last year. And so it's a good use of the space, and it allows me to, take things from the grounds. The real purpose was to develop small things, take small maples or take small native species, put them in the ground, develop them more quickly, of course. And then all of a sudden it became a place where I started grabbing stuff from the garden. So I might need to add some more.
Yep. Ever evolving.
Some more space, but yeah, these could be something really grand. But right now I'm just letting them grow and
For sure. Very cool.
honing my plant addiction. We've got some native groupings over here. So these are 2 different prairie areas and then like a water's edge. These were actually created by my volunteer Dan, who's inside. 2 really nice Sarah Rayner containers. And so they are native prairie plants. And so we're trying to not only bring attention to native tree species, but also some of our native vegetation. So we're working on understanding these, how, of course, prairie plants have 6, 8, 10-foot root systems. And so putting them into a shallow container, it's a learning process right now. So we're learning, I'm trying to figure out the timing. These guys are gonna bloom soon, so we may wind up putting that out and going from there. These are more things that were collected from the garden. White pine, some Scots pines, and this is a cornus. And so yeah, and then here's another tropical. This one was defoliated, leafed out, and again was looking a little light. So I moved it over here, and again, literally within a day or 2, the leaves have started to green up. And I apologize, I forget how to pronounce his last name. Roy, I think Minery is his name. And so he's a South Carolina potter. The tree was actually donated last year at the North Carolina Arboretum at their Bonsai as Fine Art exhibition by John Gene Angel. And John and I had met at the national show. He donated the tree in, I think it was June, September. We met at the national show and walked around together, and we picked this pot together. And Roy happens to be from South Carolina, as is John. And we just fell in love with this pot, and we picked it. And so I worked this tree pretty heavily this year, and I'm hoping to fast track it and get it out. And it's almost the same height as some of our other cypress, but it's a lot easier to move around, which is never a bad thing. But it's a cool tree, and I really had a lot of fun getting into it. But I love the combination. I love the story of the 2 South Carolina guys and 2 people whose work I respect a great deal. Roy's containers are just crazy. The glazes are just amazing. And I love just that dark, when I think of the swamps and I think of where these bald cypress come from, the water's black and it's like tannin rich and it's really acidic. And I just feel like it's like almost bubbling up from the swamps, So for me personally, when I look at it, the pot tells such a story of where the tree might come from. And I love the shape of it. I love everything about it. And it's the first pot that we've gotten from him. I've admired his work for a while, and I was so glad to get one. So yeah, but super, super cool. And to get a tree from John Gene Angel's work is work that I've really admired from afar. And then to get to see him and to get a tree donated from him was really special as well, especially a cypress tree.
I would say the most important thing when you're first starting out is to learn the tree, the health of the tree, the species of the tree. It's not as, I don't want to say that the art is not important, but I think in order to be able to do the art, you have to be able to keep the tree alive, keep it healthy, keep it happy. Learn the tree, what it can take to balance it between taking energy and having it regrow that, right? So
tree health is always the most important thing to me, because you'll never have a high quality refined bonsai if it's not a healthy tree. that they won't respond to the work you do via pruning, root pruning, right? So to me, tree health is of the most important, especially here because our conditions can be a little harsh with the exposure of the sun. So managing tree health is the most important thing that I do by rotating trees off display, when they go out, you know, the time of the year they go out, how long they can stay out, all of that is, you know, that's why half of the trees that will be on display in 3 weeks when the show happens are back here in the shade. So managing tree health is first and foremost to me. And then, of course, the styling, right? They go hand in hand, right? You can't just like have a real healthy tree that's a bush. You have to have the artistic part of it. But if the tree's not healthy, you don't have sound horticulture, sound pest management, I feel like it's very challenging to make a very quality, healthy tree without it being healthy. And soil is a huge part of that. Nutrition, pest management, light, all the resources to me come first and foremost, I think. And I concur with Angelica as far as, you know, like when I first started doing bonsai, I got a bunch of species because I was like, oh, I like the way this looks, I like the way that looks, and I'm just like hoarding and buying plants. But they all require something at a little different time, and you're repotting slightly differently, and you're pruning at a different time of year, and this one's a pine and that's a tropical. So the advice that I will give people when they start is learn a species, buy a species, and then master that, and then get another species and understand that, or you're learning about different species before you get it. Know your resources. How much light do you have at home? How much time do you have to water? You know, all of those things go into the choice. Don't pick a tree on its looks. Oh, it has pretty flowers. Okay, it's an azalea, it has pretty flowers, but you have 12 hours of sunlight and you have no way to give it shade, right? Or if you love pines and junipers, but you have 3 hours of sunlight, like you're already set up to fail. And then the battle, and then you worry about, then you get pests and fungus and all these other things because the tree is stressed, right? A healthy tree can defend itself against many things that might come its way, but an unhealthy tree is susceptible to everything. And so having a healthy tree will set you up for success, and then you'll continue to do it because you won't fail. I think a lot of people fail just because of that fact. And then it's not really it's their fault, but it's not their fault. Or someone sells them a tree and says, yeah, this will live in your yard, but maybe it won't. And even from yard to yard, there's microclimates all over the place, you know? And so someone's yard is cool and protected from the wind, and someone else's yard right next door could be full sun and windy. And so I just think that taking the horticulture into consideration is the best place to start in keeping the tree alive. You know, would you rather have a really finely styled dead tree, or would you rather have a tree that's slightly bushy and alive? Right. And you can find your calling. I mean, I've been doing bonsai professionally for 10 years. I've been doing bonsai for probably 17 years now or something. And the way I think of bonsai and design is vastly different today than it was when I started. Yeah. So the evolution of your design thoughts and principles change depending on your influences and, you know, your research and what you're seeing and, you know, how much information you're taking in. And so if you have a tree for a couple of years and you don't go crazy on the styling, that's okay, because in a couple of years you might like a different style. You know what I mean? And so I think people get excited and they want to style a tree, or they take it to a workshop and an artist helps them do something that might be very aggressive, but maybe the tree wasn't properly cared for the year leading up to it, which to me is as important as the year leading after it, you know, the year coming after it. So the year before a big styling or the year before a repotting, I'm treating those trees a little bit differently so that I know they're going to respond favorably. And then the aftercare, of course, is extremely important. But the pre-care, the year before, I think it sometimes gets lost. You buy a tree at a nursery and then you go ballistic on it. Like you don't know how that tree was cared for the year before. Right. But it's easy to get excited. Not that I haven't done that myself, right? So tree rotations from the courtyards, rotating trees even from our sun side to our shade side. So to me, shade is like always the thing. Protection.
Shade enough, our trees,
I think depending on the species, but I just think here, you know, like the courtyards, they get a lot of sun, but it's also, they live on granite benches that radiate heat. They have cobbled courtyards and a brick building surrounding them. So it becomes a heat sink. And if you go up there even in the evenings when it's cooler, it's still warm. And the benches are still warm. So long after it cools, the benches are still radiating heat. So for me, as much as anything, it's root heat. So, and certainly like with the species like you're playing with in Minnesota, like even the larch here, like our larch live in the shade all year long. And a lot of that's root temperature and keeping them cool. The trees in the courtyards are sometimes slightly up potted. So we have a little bit more resources from soil. So moisture and nutrients, of course. The soil composition. So we use lava, pumice, and akadama, but in different proportions. So the trees that are in the grow outs that are mostly in training, they have a slightly different proportion than the trees that I know are display quality and will be out. They have a little bit higher proportion of akadama. So I have a little bit higher water retention and nutrient retention. So everything revolves around the courtyard. Everything revolves around display quality trees. And to your point, as far as refinement, we do have a lot of refined trees, but we have a lot of trees in development. So, you know, those trees are potted slightly differently. Their soil mixes slightly differently. The amount of exposure to sun that they get is slightly different. But I think the root temperatures are more of an issue, to your point of exposure. I think the root temperatures are more of an issue. So if you have things on a bench that's not made of stone, then you're likely that the roots are going to be cooler. And then, you know, that allows the tree to work better and healthier. And so being confined in a pot and being put on a bench that's really hot is more stressful than the actual exposure to sun on the foliage. Of course, this is a prime time for pests. We do try to follow as much integrated pest management as possible here, identify and treat. And so we try to take that approach versus broad spectrum sprays when we can avoid it. And so, but pest management and water management is a big key for us. Cooling the benches, so we go up in the afternoons, and no matter whether the trees need water or not, we'll cool the benches down, cool the environment, clean the glass, and birds like to sit on the glass and make their mark on it, if you will. Sure. And so we have to clean that. But cooling the benches in the afternoons is a part of just trying to manage their existence up there.
Do you have a favorite tree?
I have a lot of favorite trees. I think when working on bonsai, your favorite tree is the tree you're working on. I've had enough mentors tell me that. I have personal favorite trees. Yeah, I have personal favorite trees, but at the end of the day, when you're working on any bonsai, that is your favorite tree. You should put the same level of love and commitment and effort into every single tree you work on, not just your personal favorite.
Right.
Otherwise, you end up having one really good tree, and the rest of them are like, eh.
Yeah.
I spent 6 months in Japan in 2012, and I asked my first senpai what his favorite tree was, and that was his answer. And at the time, I thought he was like just kind of being snarky, you know. And then I started to understand that reason, that idea that unless you're treating every tree that you have with the respect that it deserves, then you know you'll never really be a good bonsai practitioner. Species-wise, I like a lot of. In the last few years, I've really come to have a different. And I'll tell you, it was weird. So when COVID hit, I was by myself. So for it was a while. At first, it was a long time, and I feel like over the course of 2 years, I was probably here. At least a year by myself, and over that time, because they started and then they stopped, and then we kept going back and forth. And so the truth is that I worked on a lot of trees that I normally wouldn't have. I had to work on all of the trees because I didn't have volunteers to support. And I sat there and started to study our deciduous trees more and more and more, and found this real love and appreciation for deciduous trees and the difference at which you treat them versus evergreens or pines or junipers or something like that. And so I really had a newfound love and appreciation for deciduous trees since then. I think historically I've always really liked pines. The nursery I was at in Japan was mostly a pine nursery. And so, although when I went there, I didn't have a ton of pine experience, and when I left, I had at least some. And then, like I said, when I started doing bonsai in Florida. So I've always had a soft spot for tropical bonsai and the interest that they have. I like a lot of species. I like the deciduous conifers. I really like redwoods and larch and bald cypress trees. The flat top bald cypress style as of late has really been something that I've been mesmerized and fascinated with. And so I really kind of enjoy that too. So it changes, different seasons and different times of the year. For sure. It kind of changes for me. The winter, I love deciduous because you're pruning and you're making changes that will affect the tree moving forward in a grand way. And you can't just take a branch and twist it and bend it and put it where you want. You've got to have patience. The deciduous approach, of course, is so different. And so I've really enjoyed that over the last few years.
Andrew Robson has been to MBS a couple of times the last couple of years, and he's the deciduous guy in the west side of the country. He's over in Portland, right? Andrew certainly seems to have a passion for deciduous trees.
Yeah.
He's loving those.
It's just a really different approach.
And considerably harder trees for most people to work on, deciduous?
I don't know. You think so?
That seems to be the message I'm getting from people.
I just think you have to have more patience. And so maybe,
I
just think it takes more patience to develop them, because again, I can't just take it. They're typically a little more rigid, and you just can't wire it from head to toe and do what you want with it. You could take a limber pine or a ponderosa pine, and twist it in circles and make it look how you want in one sitting. It's very rewarding, or take a juniper that's a bush and like whack it all the way back, right? With a deciduous tree, there's only so much you can do in a given season. And, and they flush out for a period, and then, these guys slow down. This time of year, deciduous trees are like, no thanks, And so I just think they take more patience to develop. And every cut you make is important, because if you take something off that might have taken a couple of years to grow, you can't just bend another branch into its place, typically, right? In the same way you can with other species, at least.
I'd say my general favorites are tropicals.
Yeah.
If you like home,
Chris, do you want to comment?
I really enjoy working on them. And I really feel like tropicals, especially down
Yeah.
south, are a little bit of an untapped area of bonsai, kind of new in the bonsai world. And
I never
because
seen
we
them.
have all year round growing, so you get more opportunity to create really incredible things that you wouldn't be able to do up north, where things go dormant.
These Yankees.
I like the potential that southern tropical bonsai have in the world right now.
Shout out to Florida.
Shout out to Florida.
Florida women says what?
Big ups to Florida.
So your volunteer has asked the master to look over the tree, so what are you looking for?
I'm looking to see. So when I work with volunteers, it's much like a workshop. Yeah. So we take a tree, we go over it together, and I say, okay, here's what I'd like you to do. A lot of times I'll do a test patch or an example patch, and then they set forth, and then I just go back and check and do, sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot, and I'm just looking to see that it's done in a manner in which I want it to be done, for better or worse. And this tree just came off today. It's been in the courtyard since they went out. So this year, the courtyards, we had construction work, and then we had the cicadas, so the trees didn't go out till much, much later than they would normally go out. So the timing of everything has been really different. And so this tree's been out. You can see it's a little lighter in color. This is another one that once we move it into, and even here, you can see that this patch is a little darker than this patch because this gets shaded by that. And so I know that once we put it in the shade, it will green up again. And so I didn't want to be too aggressive with it. It had filled in, so I'm looking to create that negative space and to look for nice undulations and movement through the tree, creating depth and creating interest versus it just being a big puffball of foliage. So Dan, as always, has done a nice job. We call it the Dan the Man Special. And Dan has done a reasonable job of going through. And
Dan the Man Special is reasonable.
the Dan the Man Special is
Usually
that.
it means an aggressive prune.
Dan's motto is less is more.
Okay.
So he's a true literati man in every sense. And so Dan likes to remove a lot of stuff. But no, the volunteers are all great about, we set forth, we use pipe cleaners a lot. And so they'll pipe cleaner stuff. And then, like big junctions or big things that maybe need corrections. And then we'll go through and look at it together and make decisions. It's obviously in the benefit of the collection and my benefit for me to teach them what I want, right? So I think the only thing in the true kind of Japanese model that we do here is like, I'm trying to teach them all to do it how I would do it, right? So I have 9 of me. And this at least in their thought process. And so when they come across things, all the volunteers are great. We couldn't continue the collection in the manner in which it is without the help that we get. So we do tree of discussions here. So we'll take a tree from the collection, or sometimes people will bring a personal tree in, and everyone gets to look at it, and everyone talks through what they would do. And those are great exercises just to get people to think about the why, right? To me, it's a little benefit for me to just say, do this. Understanding why I want them to do that, and so that they can understand my thought process, is really important. And so investing the time in people. Most of my volunteers have been here. Dan's been here for what, did you say 7 years? I still have several volunteers that were here when I started. And, through time we've had turnover and attrition, but, the volunteers tend to stick around. We have a very diverse group of people from different backgrounds. As long as people are willing to learn and they get along with everybody, that's it. I don't like, Angelica brings enough drama to the studio that we don't need, that we don't need extra. So, no, I'm only kidding. But as long as people, as long as people get along, I could teach them what I would like them to know. And so hopefully that's, you can interview Dan on the side and he'll tell you different, but that's kind of how we go about it. So I'll look through, hopefully.
Dan, I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
Most people under prune, and then I can go in and do a little bit of detail. Sometimes.
Still less work for you.
Some people, of course. Of course.
Some people take too much off.
And everyone has a different skill set, Certain people, work better with certain species, or certain people are good at wiring, certain people are good at pruning, So I try to, a big part is just me understanding them, what they're good at, and then using that to benefit the collection in the best way. So I think that probably most programs kind of operate that way. But I was a volunteer at the National Collection. That's really how Jack Sustick was the curator at the time, and I literally walked up to him and said, I was a part of the Baltimore Bonsai Club, and we were having an event at the museum, and although Jack wasn't a part of it, he kind of like skirted through, and I could tell he was like trying to beeline it to his office, and I like chased him down the hallway, introduced myself and said, my name's Chris Baker, and I have aspirations of being a curator one day, and I'd like to volunteer here. And that sentence literally changed the trajectory of my life. And I started as a volunteer there. Jack was a mentor of mine and really taught me how to be a curator. And through there, he's the one who got me an introduction to the family in Japan that I studied with, Mr. Toro Suzuki. And, so I was a volunteer, you know what I mean? So I know what it's like to volunteer. I know what it's like to care and to give. I used to drive an hour and 20 minutes to get to the National Collection. And, spend 4 hours and turn around, drive back in the traffic. So I have volunteers that come from Milwaukee and from around the Chicagoland area. So I know what it's like to be a volunteer. So hopefully that translates into working with them and making them feel valued, at least. We try to keep the studio pretty fun. We take the work seriously, but we don't often take ourselves very seriously. So.